So I'd like to introduce New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller Ries. He's an entrepreneur and author of popular blog Startup Lessons Learned. He co-founded and served the CTO of AT&T, his third startup. He is frequently a speaker at business events and has advised a number of startups, large companies, and venture capital firms on business and product strategy. And he is an entrepreneur in residence at the Harvard Business School. His lean startup methodology has been written about in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review, Huffington Post, and many blogs. He lives in San Francisco, and I would like to welcome Ries to DevLab.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I don't know how I'm supposed to live up to that official bio. It feels very strange, but thank you. Thank you for welcoming me, and thanks everybody for being here. Let's just go over some ground rules that I think are really important. The first is I don't want your undivided attention. So if anyone made the mistake of turning off their phone or closing your laptop, if you don't do that, it's not a joke. Take your phone out of your pocket, hold it in your hand, and please tweet amongst yourselves. This is an AT&T event, so if you're not connected to the network, are you even really alive? I don't know. So I don't want you to be disconnected on my account. That would make me feel terrible. So all I ask is while you're tweeting amongst yourselves, use the lean startup hashtag, so that you can join the worldwide conversation that's happening about these ideas as we speak. That's actually the only rule. Is that okay? Nobody's really nodding, so. Yes? Okay, alright, at least I see some Apple logos glowing. So some people are online. I look forward to your feedback or starting comments as you will. So, I wrote this book called The Lean Startup, and I wanted to share a couple of ideas from it with you, but I'm much more interested in having a conversation. So, I'm kind of tired of the sound of my voice. You can tell from the rasp. I've been doing this a lot lately. So I hope we'll have time for questions, and let's talk not hypothetically about your friend's startup, but we can talk about some real issues. So is that fair? Start thinking now? Okay, thank you. So here's some ideas from the book I wanted to share, that entrepreneurs are everywhere, that entrepreneurship is management, that the unit of progress of entrepreneurship is something called validated learning, that we can steer a startup using the build, measure, learn feedback loop, and that we can hold entrepreneurs accountable using innovation accounting. And I know exactly what you're thinking. This is supposed to be a talk, at the end of the day about innovation and entrepreneurship and exciting new mobile technologies. And why are we talking about management and accounting? Two of the most boring concepts ever invented. And I apologize for that. We are going to talk about some boring things. And I want to explain why. Because who's seen like a good movie about entrepreneurship recently? Who saw The Social Network? Show of hands. Okay. Who saw my favorite entrepreneurship movie of all time, Ghostbusters? Right? Can we think about Ghostbusters for a second? Like all good entrepreneurship stories, it's a story in 3 acts. Act 1, how the plucky protagonist came to be in the right time at the right place. Get kicked out of the university lab, have the great idea, the big epiphany of what's going to happen there, interesting character flaws that we'll come back to haunt them later, etc. And that takes up a good chunk of the screenplay. Then we got Act 2, what I call the photo montage. Remember that from The Social Network, when they're writing on the cool whiteboards with the cool pens and typing on some keyboards. They bust a few ghosts. And anyway, it's like 2 minutes long, no dialogue, right on to Act 3 when they're on the cover of magazines, and the really interesting stuff starts, like, who's who, and the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, right? So when we think about building a new app, building a new startup, that's what we imagine, how we're going to have a great idea, and then like, ... then cover of magazines. And I think that's a really interesting structure, because those of you who've been in startups know that almost every decision of consequence that actually influences the outcome of a startup happens during the photo montage. But why is it not in the movie? It's because, I put to you, it's too boring to be in the movie. Right? What is actually in the photo montage? It's things like product prioritization meetings. Who's been in a product prioritization meeting recently? Show of hands. Anyone feel like that would make a really good movie? Nobody, right? But yet, if the boring stuff is what actually influences the outcome of startups, then that's the stuff we have to get good at if we're going to turn entrepreneurship into a science and get better at it. And so, no apologies, we will be talking about management and accounting. For those that don't like it, you're online so you can browse about it. Alright, so let's talk about what a startup is. This has been going around a lot in the blogosphere recently. I have been using this definition for the last few years, and I found it to be most helpful. A startup is a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. So, what's interesting about this definition to me is what it excludes. It doesn't say you live in a garage and eat ramen noodles. It doesn't say what kind of product you're working on, what size company you're in, what sector. All those things really are irrelevant. The fundamental task of an entrepreneur is to figure out how to build a sustainable business around a set of products and services. So it's not just a great idea. It is an organization that can build on ideas for continuous innovation. And that's a fancy way of saying that a startup is an experiment. But there's a funny thing about the kind of experiments we're used to running as engineers, as managers. We've all been trained in a very 20th century kind of experiment, which is, can it be built? But when was the last time someone pitched you a concept for a piece of technology and you said, I don't think it can be built. It's impossible. Right? It's like, I got this idea for a social network for dogs. The issue is not, can it be built, but rather, should it be built? That's the question of our time. Is there a sustainable business to be made around this set of products and services? And yet, all of our tools and methodologies, our management toolkits, we teach MBAs, Agile development, Waterfall, all these methodologies are primarily about building the thing in the specification as efficiently as possible, which presupposes that somebody knows what is to be specified. That's why we use the, to me, hilarious word requirements to describe what is going to be done. It's like required by who? Not handed down by a tablet last time I checked. So we got to develop a new set of tools for running these experiments in a way that makes them likely to succeed. And that leads me to the idea that entrepreneurship is a kind of management. Even though management is supposed to be that boring thing we teach MBAs and they wear suits and whatever, and entrepreneurship is supposed to be exciting in the social network, and I mentioned those cool whiteboards with the pens and they write. I just had two very different ideas coming together. And yet if you look at the definition, I think this is simply a necessary corollary that we have to develop tools for managing startups. But I feel like our current tools don't work very well, and I feel like as a matter of full disclosure, I should admit that most of the startups I have ever worked on, and most of the products I have ever worked on, have been failures. And I know as a professional talking expert, such as myself, you're not supposed to say stuff like that. Like, hi everybody, I'm a big failure. And if you follow me, you too can be a big failure, right? But that's the truth. Anyone who is telling you the truth about startups better be talking about failure, or they're lying and or selling you something. So it has to be somebody's fault that all these startups are failing, mine included. Obviously it can't be my fault. That's not acceptable. So I like to blame this guy. This is Frederick Winslow Taylor. This has the advantage of him being dead for many years. So we can't talk back. And I know it's strange to be at a mobile technology conference and blaming all our problems on a guy who never used a personal computer, let alone a mobile phone. But it's really important for us to remember where our current ideas about management came from in the first place. Because to us, the things that Taylor should be credited with having invented are too obvious for us to even remember that they had to be invented in the first place. So I want to try an idea on you. Okay, your homework assignment. Write a paper, a polemic, in favor of the idea that work should be done as efficiently as possible. Now, I think that's a hard assignment because who's the counter-argument? Who are you trying to convince? Where in this world is anybody who doesn't already agree that work should be done as efficiently as possible? Well, my favorite is something that Taylor called the task plus bonus system, which we just call tasks. And just see if you can wrap your mind around this. If you have a large project that needs to be done, an excellent way to do it is to have a professional manager decompose the large project into a series of small projects called tasks. Farm those tasks out to functional specialists who work in functional departments. And then here's my favorite part. If someone finds a way to do their task better than expected, in lower budget, ahead of schedule, higher quality, then they should be paid a bonus and promoted rather than being penalized or fired. Does this seem like a good idea, anybody? I want you to imagine, who do you have to convince to adopt the system? Well, believe it or not, in the 19th century, was considered state-of-the-art management. If someone found a way to do their task better than expected, what do we know about them? Well, they're obviously a person of low moral character. Otherwise, a liar. Because they could have been doing it the better way this whole time, but they've been charging you the higher amount, all this time, obviously lying to you. And furthermore, what do we know about their coworkers, who are all still doing it the old way? Fired a lot of them, because they're all a bunch of degenerates who could have been doing it the better way this whole time, and yet choose the slothful and inefficient path. So just try to imagine working, not any of you work in a company like this, but try to imagine what it would have been like. Maybe you have a friend. So for your friends who work in an organization like this, it's truly horrible. And it's important that we start there, because all of our management methods really date back to this way of thinking. And our problem is that these solutions require us to know what to build in the first place. So we are very efficiently in our modern economy building the wrong things, which we'll get to. So what we need is a new toolkit. I call it entrepreneurial management, which is designed specifically for the soil of extreme uncertainty in which startups thrive. And it's a toolkit different than what we're teaching MBAs. Not better than general management, not worse, simply a parallel discipline. And probably the most important single tool in the new entrepreneurial management toolkit is probably also the most overused buzzword of the year, for which I apologize, the pivot. Who's sick and tired of hearing about pivots already? Yeah, hands go up right real fast on that one, I know. I am sorry. I saw this, I kid you not, this cartoon was in the New Yorker magazine. I don't know if you can read this caption. It says, "I'm not leaving you, I'm pivoting to another man." So when it gets turned into a New Yorker cartoon, you know you've reached the point of parody, but you can't understand startups if you don't understand the pivot. Because in the movies, you have a great idea, and it's the greatness of your idea that makes you successful. But if you get the real story of what actually happened with every successful app, every successful product, every successful startup, you will notice this bizarre thing that the first idea of successful founders is not any better than the first idea of the failed founders. They're actually equally crazy. It's just that the successful founders, when they ran into difficulty, they didn't persevere the plane straight into the ground through stubbornness. Right? When it succeeds, it's called perseverance, but when you crash and burn, it becomes stubbornness. But how do you know in the moment? Instead, they did this funny thing, a change in strategy without a change in vision. That's what a pivot is. So they're able to say, look, I still have my destination in mind. I still know what I want to do, but let's find a new route to get there instead of just banging our heads against the wall over and over again. And the premise of the lean startup is as follows. If you want to extend the runway of whatever you're doing, one way to work more efficiently is simply to use better engineering techniques or get more money to extend runway. But another way is to get to the moment of pivoting sooner. So the right way to think about runway is not how much money do we have left, how much time do we have left, but rather how many opportunities to pivot do we have left. And that goes all the way back to the idea that a startup is an experiment. All we have to ask in everything we do is not how do I achieve the spec more efficiently, but rather, is there a better way to run this experiment to get the learning that I need a little bit sooner? And that's why we call the unit of progress for entrepreneurship something called validated learning, scientific learning, not just a good story. And this is really important because right now, the way we measure progress in almost all of our new products is, are we on time and on budget? So we'll start a board meeting, go to your favorite hackathon, and it's like we are knocking down features left and right, and therefore we are on track. It's as if we're driving a car straight off a cliff, but bragging about the outstanding gas mileage that we're getting. We're very efficiently going to crash into a wall. But that is Fred Taylorism 101. I call it achieving failure. So when I first moved to the Bay Area, I actually worked at a startup that spent 5 years and $50 million in stealth R&D. By the time customers saw the product, it was something like 200 employees already. And you already know if you know anything about software development, you already know the ending to this story, which is we did the massive launch with a tremendous fanfare and all the big newspapers and blogs and everything. And it turned out that the product, customers didn't want to use it. But in every other respect, you got to understand this. We did everything in the business plan just like it said. So we had this beautiful business plan. If I had a copy that you could read it, you would weep to read this business plan. It was so brilliant. And it said exactly what was supposed to happen. And it had this graph at the end. Everyone know the hockey stick shaped graph we're trying to get? People forget that the defining characteristic of the hockey stick is the long flat part. So when we launched the product and had almost no customers for months, we were right on plan. Right? It was like, wow, this plan is genius. It correctly predicted exactly how many customers we'll have month by month, and therefore, we know that we are like T-minus 3, 2, 1 to the curve in the hockey stick. But we just kept going on the flat part indefinitely until the company failed. Now, it sounds funny, you're like, what idiots? Can't believe they did that. But in the projects that you're working on right now, in the startups that you know that your friend is working on right now, if we're in the long flat part, how do we know if we are making progress or we're going to be on the flat part forever? That's the question that we have to answer. And that's when I say a startup is an experiment. This is what I mean. After I had that $50 million failure, I thought, well, that's probably not keep doing that stupid thing over and over again. And I had a chance to build a new company called InView, which does 3D avatar social network. A pretty complicated technical challenge, download it to the desktop, all that stuff. And We spent 6 months building the initial product. By we, of course, I meant me. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of this company. And I personally wrote the software, thousands and thousands and thousands of lines of software. And we had this brilliant strategy, which was we're trying to do the hot social technology at the time, which is instant messaging. So we're going to interoperate with all these social networks, all the existing IM networks. And I wrote all this software to do the interoperability. And you know, if you think through a 3D avatar social network, you can start to see the scope creep already starting to happen. Just think about it for a second. The 3D rendering technology, micropayments, microcurrencies, right? We have the social network website. You got to be able to create your own, basically, MySpace for your avatar. We want to have user-generated content so you can buy and sell 3D. So just the microtransaction, you start to see the scope of this thing. 6 months, if you're keeping track, is not really enough time to do a good job building that whole product. So as we started to get closer and closer to the launch deadline, you know, we were adamant, we're not going to spend 5 years of our life building something nobody wants again. So we're only going to spend 6 months. I started to get nervous as the CTO, because everyone knows time, quality, money thing too. Right? And we didn't have very much time, we didn't have very much money, so you see where this is going. The quality of this product, you know, was not as high as one would like. If I'm being totally honest, this product sucked. It's terrible. And the first version of it would be more likely to crash your computer than it would be to give you a 3D avatar experience. And I'm starting to get nervous because we're going to launch this product. And you know, I have this image in my mind. Some enterprising journalist would find version 1 of the product and they'd write this huge expose. Idiots at IMVU don't know what quality software means. You know, subtitle, never hire them again, arrow pointing my mugshot right there. So like my career will be over. Because we all know that in traditional product development, we're doing like Madden 2012 or something like that. If we have a low quality product, it is only because we were sloppy and didn't do a good job. Because we already understand what the customer wants. So go back to my example in InView. We launched this product, we put it out there, and I kid you not, I was actually relieved when it turned out that we didn't crash anybody's computer at all. Because nobody downloaded the product. Nobody would even try it enough for it to download. You know, it could have erased their hard drive if they tried it, but they didn't. So technically, I'm off the hook, right? Everything's fine. No, but then I'm like, wait a minute, hold on. What is wrong? And to make a long story short, we realized that we made a strategic error, and we had to pivot the company away from the interoperability towards a standalone network. And we can talk about this if you're more interested, but the point for me, if you could sympathize, I know we're all developers here, right? So can you sympathize with me for a second? Whose software had to be thrown out because of the pivot? Right? Me, my software. The thousands and thousands of lines of beautiful code, if I do say so myself. Well-factored, well-documented, excellent continuous integration, test coverage. But here's the funny thing, this is what really bothered me. The good code got thrown out, and the bad code got thrown out. The code that was well-documented got thrown out, and the code I was planning to get around to documenting someday in the future. Right? The crappy open source code we grabbed from somebody else, and a beautiful, pristine, 100% perfect code that I had written with my bare hands. It all got thrown out because we were building the wrong product. And I was depressed. Because, you know, this month's work, I was like, wait a minute, why do I even have to be here? Couldn't my co-founders have spent the last 6 months working on this product and I could have been on a beach somewhere, you know, sipping umbrella drinks? Because what's the point if all your work gets thrown away? What was the point? And you all know the excuse I used to make myself feel better, right? You know where this is headed? Well, if we hadn't done this work, we would not have learned this important thing about customers. That they don't want this product. So the learning validates the time that we spent, right? The learning is the value, and that made myself feel better. Until I had the following thought that actually kept me up in the middle of the night, which was, wait a minute. If my goal the last 6 months was to learn this specific thing about customers, why did it take 6 months? Why is the word learning only coming up now as an excuse? You know what my co-founders and I talked about for those 6 months. Did we talk about what we were trying to learn? No. We talked about what features do we absolutely have to include in the first version and which ones can we let go? Which bugs do we absolutely have to fix and which ones are non-showstoppers? What is required for a good design for usable product? I wish I could have every single one of those hours back because customers didn't try any of our features. So it really didn't matter what was in version 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It didn't matter what was on the 10th hour of user experience. We couldn't get people past page 1. And I started to think to myself, wait a minute. If my goal was to learn this thing, did I need to support 12 different IM networks in version 1? Would the learning have been the same if I supported only 6? Or only 3? Or only 1? Well, that's already an order of magnitude reduction in of code I would have had to write, and yet learning would have been the same. And then it really got freaky. I said, wait a minute. What if I just hired a web designer to spend one day creating a fake landing page that has a screenshot of the product we propose to build and a giant download button? Would I even have had to create page 2, where I apologize that there's no product available at this time? Or could I have left that to be a 404 and just kept a count of 404s? They get through. Nobody wants to download the product. That means literally nobody would have seen the 404. So it wouldn't have mattered. And that was really disturbing. Because how is it possible that some web designer could do in one day work that has the same value to the company as my 6 months of killing myself? How is that possible? On my business card, what does it say? It says Chief Technology Officer. It does not say Chief Crappy one-page landing page experiment, all right? My job is to build technology. That's my functional identity. And that's sounding like Fred Taylor a little bit. You're right. I was trained to be in a functional department where I get promoted. In fact, I did get promoted in that previous company for building extremely scalable, well-architected software that never had any scalability problems because nobody used it. But I got promoted because the technology was awesome. Does that sound like the company your friend works at, maybe? Anybody? Yeah. We are wasting people's time on an industrial scale. And that's what we are trying to stop in the Lean Startup movement. Now, it's embarrassing, I think, if you look at the stats on the companies that fail, and you ask yourself, for the friends you know who've been in companies that fail, for the big companies that launch new products, for the thousands and thousands of apps that get launched every single day that turn out to be a failure, not because the technology didn't work, but because the business didn't make sense, because customers didn't actually want that product. That is a preventable condition. And so I want to walk us through just how we do that. When we're building software, all we really are is a catalyst that transforms ideas into code. Okay, everything else, all the pizza and the Mountain Dew and the business plans, and all that stuff is a side effect. A very interesting side effect, but not a necessary part of the business. We are catalysts that turn ideas into code. And when customers interact with that code, we can measure what happens, generating data from which we can learn, influencing our next set of ideas. This is a very simple idea, a very simple 3-stage feedback loop. But it's actually a very powerful heuristic. Whenever we're evaluating any process, any concept in our infrastructure, architecture, anything that we're trying to do, we can ask ourselves, does it minimize total time through this loop? Or, excuse me, can I get some water? Is that possible? My voice is starting to go out. It's not good. Okay, that seems to be coming back. So most of us are really good at, say, figuring out how to build most efficiently, but that's not our goal. Our goal is to learn most efficiently. So working backwards from how long it took when I have an idea and when I have learned if that idea is actually any good. And as we go into new platforms, especially in mobile, this is a huge issue because people are used to evaluating the platform you're going to use. Thank you very much. From a technical efficiency point of view first, and then figuring out what are we going to build on the best platform. But that is generally a misunderstanding of what the goal of new product development is. Like, our goal is not to go to the platform that's the biggest, fastest, best, because we're not in a rush to get big. What we're trying to do is be in a rush to learn what actually works. So we can't just evaluate the platforms we use simply from which one is technically the most efficient. We have to actually look at techniques that allow us to learn faster, and that often will mean architecting the application, choosing a different platform in a radically different way. Now, there are a lot of specific techniques that can help us do that. I'm not going to bother going through this whole chart. Every single one of these topics you can learn a ton about online, and I encourage you to do that. Some of you are probably doing that right now because you're bored of me talking, that's fine. I just want to point out that all these techniques, it's not the technique that matters. So, people talk about, well, on the web you can do this kind of split testing, but it's hard to do in mobile. You can do this in desktop software, but you have to figure out for yourself what are the techniques and architectures you want to use in your product. So, for example, I know a lot of mobile developers that will go Android first, even though their application makes more sense on iOS, only because they can iterate faster on Android, figure out what the right product is, and then port to iOS. But engineers think that's wildly inefficient. You're building the wrong application, the one that has a smaller market opportunity. NDAs hate this. It's like, wait a minute, but iOS has the bigger market share. Well, is our goal market share, or is our goal to learn? You can also implement, you have a choice. How much of the logic of your application is client-side versus server-side? For best user experience and most efficient operation, it should be client-side. But for most rapid experimentation, it probably should be server-side. So a surprising number of companies are starting with apps that are basically dumb terminals, remote control, simply so they can get through this feedback loop faster. So Every platform, there are ways to experiment more quickly, but you have to start with that premise from the beginning. And that is actually the hard part, is changing the mentality to rapid iteration versus most efficient development. Does that make sense? I guarantee you, every engineer in the world, once you get them to understand this concept, can immediately brainstorm like 100 new ideas for how to go faster. But the problem is most of us just can't imagine why we want to do it in the first place. Anyway, I know that there's one thing a lot of you are thinking, which is, hold on, he promised he was going to talk about accounting. When's that going to be? I know, you could barely hold on. I know accounting is so interesting. It's so exciting, and I did promise I would talk about it. I don't want to disappoint. I want to talk about something called innovation accounting. This is not to be confused with innovative accounting, which is what will get you thrown in prison. So, please do be careful. I want to walk you through a little hypothetical, see if this sounds familiar to you. If you're trying to create something new, there's always someone who is your primary stakeholder who holds you accountable. Could be your spouse, if you're a garage entrepreneur, your VC, CFO if you're in a big company. There's always somebody who you have to show progress to. Here's how the negotiation generally goes. I've seen this in all three of those contexts many times. Honey, VC, CFO, have I got a deal for you? I got this idea for a product. And if you give me, $1 million in a year, and this team of 5, I promise you the most amazing results. We're going to have so many millions of downloads, millions of customers, millions in revenue. We're going to be in the cover magazine. It's going to be awesome a year from now. You just got to be patient. And now, whoever it is says, great, let's do it. Okay, we're in. Now, we all know that the political capital of a new project is never highest than it is the day after it was authorized. Right? Day 1 of development is always the most fun. It gets monotonically worse from there until we hit product market fit. So what happens 1 year later? Let's do a little time lapse. 1 year later, go through the photo montage. Feel what's about to happen. What do we know for sure is true 1 year later?
Magazine cover.
Right, we're on the cover of magazines just like in Ghostbusters. Probably not. What we know for sure is that the money has been spent. The money is gone right on schedule, every time. 100% efficiency at spending money. We're really good at that. I guarantee you that everybody involved was very busy the whole time. So schedules were made, products were built, milestones were achieved. But what if we're still on the flat part of the hockey stick? What happens? Conversation 2. Honey, CFO, VC. So you remember that part where I promised you these incredible results? Not as much. But, instead of having millions of customers, we have hundreds. And that graph, I have a great hockey stick graph, how we're doing. One of the units in the graph, it's not thousands, it's actually in ones. If you've never pitched a VC, by the way, with a graph where you get asked a question about the units and have to reply, it's in ones, as we did in Intuit. Not recommended. Because you all know what's coming. It's funny because we all know this person's about to get fired, right? This is like spouse being like, enough, get your regular job back, right? This is a VC saying. And we love, as entrepreneurs, we love to keep score on the vulture capitalists and corporate suits who they don't understand the importance of innovation, and they are constantly pulling the plug on promising innovations right before they would have been there. You guys know what I'm talking about? For the finance people in the room, this is what we say about you when you're not here. But I would like to look at it from their point of view for a second. Imagine that you are the finance person, and you've got multiple teams who come to you, and they all have pathetically small results. I mean, they promised you the moon, and they always deliver, the graph in ones. How can you tell the difference between a team that is in fact on the brink of success or a team that has been goofing off and doing nothing the whole time? In both cases, the metrics would be exactly the same, almost no customers. In both cases, there's a very entertaining story about how much has been learned. So what does the entrepreneur say? I know I didn't accomplish the results, but I have learned so much. And if you just give me another year, and like $5 million this time, and a team of 25, I promise you, and you know what's going to happen. That's not going to go for it. But we have to look at that from the person who holds the entrepreneur accountable from their point of view. If our metrics can't tell the difference between the best entrepreneur in the world and Bozo the Clown, then that's a problem with the paradigm of how we hold people accountable. We have to change that. And we as entrepreneurs have to be the ones to teach the new and proper way of accounting for success. And I call it innovation accounting. Someone on Twitter was recently calling it growth forensics. I don't know if your growth is real, sustainable growth, or fantasy. So this is a lot of detail and involves math, so I can't do it justice in the few minutes we have today, but I want to just mention that we want to change from product and business milestones to what I call learning milestones. The first, establish the baseline. Take that spreadsheet that generates the amazing, 5-year, $100 million business, and let's look at those input metrics and figure out how do we get those numbers right now by building a minimum viable product, or MVP. The product is our smallest experiment that will help us start the process of figuring out where are we right now. So if eventually we're going to have a product with a lifetime value per customer of $100, what's the lifetime value right now with our early prototype? Even if it's $0, that's not a problem. That's just a fact. So it's better to have bad news that's true rather than good news that we just made up, right? So let's go find out what the numbers actually are, and then we can start to tune the engine to try to bring those numbers from the bad baseline towards what it says it's supposed to be in our business plan. And last, we can schedule the meeting in advance to decide if it's time to pivot or persevere. This is the last tip I'll leave you with. If you've ever been in a meeting to decide if you need to pivot, anyone ever done that before? You will know it's the worst meeting ever. It's like the day before the board meeting. We're supposed to report to the higher management tomorrow. Oh, it's always tomorrow. It's 11 p.m. The walls are on fire. The roof is caving in. It's utter disaster. Let's come up with some kind of Hail Mary new thing to pitch, right? That's not exactly a good environment for nice, rational, scientific thinking, right? So here's what I say. Let's put the meeting on the calendar in advance. Let's just say we know we're going to have to pivot along the way. So let's just, every 6 weeks, every 4, at some periodic interval, let's have a meeting and decide if it's time to pivot. What's amazing about that is, first of all, you can have the meeting without fear. It's not a morale problem. It doesn't mean, oh, we're doomed. It's just a routine part of our work. And then you can say, well, gosh, why don't I try to work backwards from what do I need to do today in order to know 4 weeks from now if it's time to pivot or not? How will I know? What are the metrics I need to look at to figure out if my strategy is on the way to working or not? And when you look through things through that lens, you will all of a sudden discover tons and tons of work that seems like it's necessary, but actually doesn't help you make a decision at all. So you can stop wasting people's time if you just adopt that very simple cadence. Now, in the time we have left, I just want to admit that I left a bunch of questions unanswered, like, well, how do you know specifically what to pivot? Well, what are the specific metrics of growth forensics? And my favorite, this last one, is it possible to go faster even as we're successful? Or is bureaucracy kind of our inevitable destination? And I admit I left the questions unanswered because I heard there's this really awesome book that just came out, and you should check it out. So, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and attention. I'm happy if there's a way for people to ask questions. I'm happy to have a conversation. I know it's a dangerous place to be as a speaker between people and their robotically produced drinks. So, we'll do this as long as people like, and then I hope you enjoy the robots.
We can definitely entertain a few questions. Questions from the audience. Who's up right here?
Thank you. So, big fan of your work.
Thank you very much.
I may have a copy of that awesome book as well.
What do you do with only one copy then?
It's digital, right?
I know it's hard. Don't worry, they're available.
Yeah.
We won't run out, I promise.
If you sign it, I'll get one.
Yeah.
So I currently, my friend currently works at a larger company that got acquired, and it's in the mobile space, and now we're trying to, we've had a lot of churn, like as would happen when acquisition happens, but now we want to continue to innovate, and if we have an idea, or I have an idea, or my friend has an idea, it's difficult to convince people within the company to agree with that, and they want to see the numbers, and they want to see how this makes sense to them before they even jump into it.
Of course.
And so, how would you kind of position that in order to get this sort of innovation happening, even at a small scale? Is I guess my
yeah, it totally makes sense, and you are not alone. This is a very, very common issue. And it goes right back to Fred Taylorism 101, that general managers have been trained to make spreadsheets that forecast demand. And the thing that all of us as entrepreneurs find really hard to understand, when I found this out, I was actually stunned. In the sustaining innovation part of a big company's portfolio, forecasts come true. Can you believe that? I've never seen a forecast that came true in my whole life. I've never worked on a product that had even remotely accurate forecast. It was mind-boggling to me that there are places where you can forecast what's going to happen. And so if you're working on a project that is in that sustaining innovation part of the portfolio, you're accustomed to feeling like people who can't accurately forecast are incompetent. But if you've read a book like The Innovator's Dilemma, you will know that companies that only do the things that have high ROI and that can be accurately forecast inevitably put themselves out of business because they simply can't leap on to the next disruptive thing. That's just the curse of trying to innovate inside an established company. And the solution to that problem is to teach the general managers who have to hold you accountable this new innovation accounting system. Because what they have to understand is that in a lot of companies, the innovation guy is just the guy who comes in and wears jeans. Okay? And like, I got a call from a general manager of a monster company, and they wanted my instruction. Hey, teach us about innovation. And they said, well, we had a conversation. I said, look, they're like, explain to us why we should invest in innovation. And I was like, well, if you don't, your company will die. And like, I don't know, we're in the Fortune 100. I don't think we're at any risk of dying. I was like, right, that's what makes you vulnerable. You don't think this is going to happen to you. And like, look around the rest of the Fortune 100 and go find you press articles where every single one of those companies said we're invincible and now it's having some trouble. So that's problem number one. So like then they kind of got that and they're like, okay, but we have an innovation division. And I was like, well, what do they do? And they're like, I'm not really sure. They ride around scooters and they don't have to wear a suit. So like, but like I said, well, what do they actually? They make reports, concept documents, room of the future. Like, do they actually do any work? No. So that's what most people think innovate. When you say, okay, we need to free ourselves from the shackles of traditional accounting, they think you mean sloppy, no accountability, free money. Who wouldn't want that? Free money to just do whatever you want, wear jeans. Like we have to tell them, no, look, we have a rigorous, disciplined approach that you can hold us accountable for our innovation. It's just different than the one you learned in your MBA program. And if you're willing to learn this new thing, then I promise you full transparency. I will show you the experiments I run. And you'll be able to see that they're valuable. So, is there a follow-up?
Yeah, the follow-up is, I think what you teach is very efficient at learning and getting to a better result.
Yeah.
But is there also a way to sharpen your intuition to understand a little bit better what customers may want or what the market may want?
Yeah, this is the lesson of the scientific method. Great scientists have great intuition because they have trained it over time with concrete testing. So if you make concrete predictions about what's supposed to happen, run experiments that then teach you whether it happens or not, your intuition gets better over time. That's why the best entrepreneurs look like geniuses today. It's because they have spent years training in this discipline. And most of us make the mistake of using vanity metrics to evaluate whether things are successful or not. And so we're basically training the neural net on garbage data. It's like we're breathing on our exhaust. And so I know a lot of people who say, well, I ask a lot of engineers, marketers, all people, how do you know you're making progress in your product? They always say, well, we launched these great new features, and now the numbers are up and to the right. Therefore, the new features cause the numbers going up and to the right. And I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I believe in astrology, and I heard that because Mercury is in retrograde, that also causes numbers to go up and to the right. So I have an alternate theory of what's going on. And engineers get so pissed at me when I say stuff like that. They're like, how dare you? I'm like, listen, both of us believe in astrology, but you live here. I'm just visiting. So who should be upset? Not me. You have the problem. You don't know that A caused B just because something happened after the fact. Because if I walk down this hall to marketing, and I say, how do you know you're making progress? Guess what they'll say? Well, we just launched this great new marketing campaign, and this month the numbers are up and to the right. By the way, what happens when the numbers go down? You ever seen this? All of a sudden, it's not my fault. It's not the thing I was working on. It's either seasonal effects. Ever notice how seasonal effects only ever make numbers go down, never up? Never once heard someone be like, our numbers are up and to the right, but it's not because of what we were working on. It's seasonal. Never heard that my whole life. Or we lead to these great features for those idiots in marketing sabotage. Right? So we're training our neural net on our own private reality. So it starts with accountability and accounting. That is the bedrock of how this works. And I have a diagram in the book called The Startup Way. Accountability, process, culture, people. You have to go bottoms up, not top down, which is really counterintuitive. But anyway, and there's one last thing. This can be done in large companies. I work now with a lot of large companies, and I've seen it with my own eyes. It requires executive structural change to make it happen. And the number one structural change I recommend is people who in your company are entrepreneurs are given a business card that says entrepreneur as a job title. And we understand that entrepreneurship is a job function. It's like just as important a corporate function as marketing, engineering, operations. And when people look back on this time in the future, they're going to be, what? There was no marketing department? What are the idiots? But right, there was no entrepreneurship department. We didn't think of it that way. So I hope that's helpful. Who's got the mic?
Yeah, just one more. Yeah, go ahead, Divya's got it.
How would you, what advice would you give for applying these strategies to learn as quickly as possible to a hardware company?
Yeah, it's exactly the same. It's just about build, measure, learn. Now, people get confused because they're like, well, hold on, software companies do continuous deployment and they can go to customers 50 times a day. But my hardware, I can't do it that fast, therefore I can't do it. It's like, no. Whoever learns the fastest wins. So it doesn't matter how fast you are compared to Zynga, it matters how fast are you compared to your competitors. And there's basically two ways to go about this. One is you go to more rapid prototyping infrastructure, and I see this a lot, in 3D printing, CNC, all these technologies that allow you to, if an object is smaller than a bread box, you can have it made in small quantities, in a couple of weeks instead of years. Like that's one path to go down. Or we can separate the long-term, high scalability product development from what we call customer development or market testing. So I'll just give you one example, just in case you're like, well, hold on, let's pick a really hard one, like an industrial setting. I was working with a company that makes gas turbine engines. Okay, so we're not talking about like Kickstarter projects, okay? We're talking about multi-million-dollar massive engines. I honestly have no idea what they're used for, like fracking and like offshore oil drilling and all kinds of crazy stuff. I don't understand anything about it. And like all good big companies, they had a 5-year plan for this new product they were planning to build. And I'm like, okay, who believes in the 5-year plan? Everyone raise their hand. And everyone raised their hand at first, and I was like, no, but really, who believes in this 5-year plan? And like all the hands went down, right? Because we know you can't wait 5 years before getting feedback from the market. So I turned to one of the engineers and I said, okay, I understand that it takes 5 years to develop this engine in quantity, supply chain, and all this stuff. What if you just had to create one engine? He's like, well, it still take 5 years. I said, no, I don't think you understand. One engine. This is literally what he said to me. He said, wait, you don't need one engine, do you? He's like, yeah, no, one actual physical specimen. He's like, well, that's easy. We can do that right now. He said, but you'd have to decide which use case you wanted to use it for. Who's the first customer? I'm like, well, isn't that a really good question? Now, when you sort of unpack this thread, you realize, oh, this 5-year plan required them to build an engine that could be used at land and at sea, and in this, in the air and the liquid. This massive. They spent 9 months building this requirements document. I said, okay, what if we just picked one use case for one customer? Would that make the engineering problem easier? He's like, oh yeah. And they started to be like, wait, if that's all you're going to do, we could just take one of our existing engines and modify it. And that wouldn't be a very efficient way to do it, but who cares how much money you make or lose on one engine? And I use this example because there's no new technology. There's nothing. It's just a change in mindset. And in this same meeting, there was a senior executive in the company who said, wait a minute, but what's the point of selling one engine? We're a multi-million-dollar company making $2 million from one engine. Who cares? I mean, you're talking about selling it at a loss. It's a waste of time. Right? So he's like, oh, the vanity metrics would be too small, so I don't care. But it's like, wait a minute. Do you think we'll learn something from selling one engine? Do you think that will help us understand the channel partners, the distribution? Because as soon as we started to talk about what would be required to sell the one engine, 100 new issues came up that we hadn't talked about before. Like, oh, well, how is it going to be distributed? And, oh, we don't actually have a distributor, so that's like new issues that really were like supposed to happen in year 5 of the 5-year plan. Does that kind of give you a sense of how it will work?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Okay, that's it. All right. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.